будущих наших мероприятиях, чтобы посольство Филиппин к нам приходило еще чаще. Вот, сегодня у нас в гостях генеральный консул посольства Филиппин. Я думаю, я с удовольствием перед этим передам слово заместителю директора Института стран Азии Африки МГУ по внеучебной работе Екатерине Александровне Баклановой. Пожалуйста.
Позвольте сразу перейти на английский. Мы договаривались, что лекция будет на английском. Я уверена, что вы все знаете этот язык. Dear esteemed guests, we are very much happy to greet again the diplomats of the Philippine Embassy in Russia here at the Center. And please let me introduce Mr. Роберт Феррер, General Consul of the Philippine Embassy and Deputy Chief of the Mission. And Mr. Fеррер has kindly offered us a very good and insightful lecture on the Philippine-Russian cooperation and on the history of the Philippine-Russian diplomatic ties. And this is, I would say that it's like an exclusive lecture because, as far as I understood, it's the preparation for a bigger event on a higher level. But you would be the first who will listen to the stems of this lecture right now, thanks to Consul General of the Philippine Embassy. And we also have here our previous lecturer, Ms. Catherine Alpai. Specialist in the Philippine culture, and Ms. Vida Kara. And thank you very much for coming. And please, without further ado, the floor is yours. And please welcome.
Thank you, Professor. I'll speak in English. Is that okay? So everyone understands English. I'll speak slowly. So first of all, greetings on behalf of the Filipino nation. We are 110 million people. So there's a province in India called Bihar. Bihar province can easily swallow the entire population of the Philippines. But we are one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population. And in terms of global distribution, we are scattered in a uniform way across the globe. Some overseas Mexicans, they're concentrated in the southern United States. Overseas Chinese, like us, are also scattered in a uniform way around the world. But the unique thing about the Philippines is we bring our Christian culture with us, our Christian perspective, and our traditional values and way of life. And Filipinos, I'd like to think of Filipinos as like one of the glues of the world to keep the world together. Because I'll tell you an anecdote. I worked in Vienna before, from 2002 to 2008. I was the alternate permanent representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency, and I was part of technical working groups and so on and so forth. And in some of the IAEA offices, there are Filipinos, all right, international civil servants. If there is no Filipino in the office, the Serbs, Croats, they would quarrel, the Mexicans and the Uruguayans would quarrel. But if there's a Filipino there, he or she would be the peacemaker. He or she would be the one who would instigate parties or socials or events to remove the tension. So that's like the God-given role of the Philippines. And like many other nations, we're trying to be sensitive to our role in the world now. And we're so honored to be in Russia. We're very happy to be in Russia. On behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Igor Bailen, you see his name itself speaks highly of the Philippines' regard for Russia. One of my best friends, he's the deputy head of the Senate Commission on Appointments. His name is Vladimir. So you see many Russian names among Filipinos. So of course, Anna Karenina, we all grow up reading Tolstoy, Dostoevsky in school. So we're very much familiar with Russian literature. Not so much Russian film. Not so much Russian poetry, not so much Russian visual arts, but your literature, we are very much into it, Filipinos. So I hope I will not bore you with this lecture, but basically what I'm trying to present, Professor Koldunova, Professor Furlova, Madam Marina, is why is Manila and Moscow connected? What does Manila have to do with Moscow? Other than the fact that they both start with the letter M. Okay, so they have just a bit of a background. So I was a former history major in the University of the Philippines before I transferred to another discipline, which is international studies. So under history, my professor was Professor Ziu Salazar. When I shifted to international studies, one of my professors is Dr. Clarita Carlos, who now happens to be the National Security Advisor of the Philippines. So these two teachers, they drilled me basically in how I appreciated what's coming. So after I left the University of the Philippines, my master's program, after I finished, I became a diplomat. I was assigned to Vienna first. So I studied the history of Vienna, the conflict between the Ottomans and the Polish princes, the Hussars, etc., the Christian kingdom, the Holy Roman Empire. I was there for 6 years. After that, I got posted to India. So I became familiar with the history of the Hindus, the Ottoman, the Mughal Empire, the Persian influence in India, etc. So I was there for 3 years. And then I got transferred to Turkey. So these three countries, Habsburg, Vienna, India, and Turkey, together, and then I use the lens of my training as a historian and as a political scientist under Salazar and Carlos, and then I use that. So whatever comes my way, that's the filter. So when I came to Moscow, of course I got interested in your history, very rich. In fact, it's so overwhelming. When I first arrived in Moscow, I could not take Russia in. I was overwhelmed, Professor, to the point of collapse. My boss, Ambassador Carlos Soreta, is a big man. I used to joke that the Ambassador Soreta, because he's a big man, he can swallow Russia. But I'm not as big as him. And my mind is not as big as his. But I try my best, all right? So I studied the history of Moscow and Manila, and then Ambassador Igor Bailen gave me instructions to make this visit by Mayor Sobyanin, Dr. Sheremin, to Manila. And this is one of the building blocks of that visit. Why is that visit going to happen? Anyway, we know the global situation right now. We are after friendships, connections. We are after positively influencing each other for peace, for the greater good. Okay, so Moscow and Manila, past, present, and future. So faculty and students of the Moscow State University Lomonosov campus and members and guests of the Center of Oriental Literature of the Russian State Library, good evening, and I wish to thank Professor Ekaterina Baklanova of the Department of Asian and African Studies. Sorry, I called her Dr. Koldunova. My mistake. Yeah, of course I know her. Of the Lomonosov MSU for this opportunity to address you all today. Let's see, let's go straight to it. So the Russian Federation considers its bilateral relations with the Philippines as profoundly significant in the face of current global challenges and vice versa. Because I was supposed to deliver this lecture at MGIMO University, that's right. I thought of Professor Koldunova, apologies. In 1453, when the Byzantine Empire fell to Sultan Mehmed of the Ottoman Empire, Christianity's location, the center of Christianity, shifted from Byzantium, Constantinople, to Kiev, right? So 1453, when the Byzantine Empire fell to Sultan Mehmed of the Ottoman Empire, there's Rome, first Rome. The second Rome was Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. I was consul general in Turkey for 3 years, so I would go to Istanbul all the time as part of my job. And my main frustration is I didn't spend much time in the archives of the Ottomans and in Istanbul. So I'd like to go back there. So, second Rome is Constantinople. When it fell 1453, and there's the double-headed eagle, of course, of the Byzantines, which your country has adopted as its emblem as well. Meaning Russia is a cultural and historical descendant of Byzantium. Okay, so I keep telling them that. When I lived in Turkey, I would go to Cappadocia, I would go to Chora Church, I would go to Hagia Sophia. Those icons have been defaced or covered up, right? So that was my situation in Turkey. Oh, the gold has been washed away, covered up, what a shame. I went to the caves of Cappadocia, and then I came to Moscow. It's like I traveled back in time. It's like, oh wow. So for my mind, it's like, wow, it's brand new, it's fresh. Back in Turkey, these are old or defaced, all right? So Christianity's focus shifted to Kievan Rus and then later Muscovy. Okay. Meanwhile, Manila was founded in 1571 or 451 years ago. Moscow, of course, has just celebrated in September its 875th anniversary. And if we go back to that historical period, who was the ruler of Manila at the time? 1571. It was Raja Sulaiman. Raja Sulaiman was defeated by the forces of the Spanish conquistador Miguel Lopez de Legazpi. At the time, this defeat was inevitable because Legazpi brought Christianity to the Philippines. So Legazpi is one of those conquistadores, like the same conquistadores who conquered the Incas in Peru, the Aztecs, etc., etc. So while this was going on, there were also conquistadores in the Philippines. The Philippines at the time was a series of Muslim kingdoms. Understand, we are composed of many, many islands, and each island sometimes has its own king. So in Manila, we had three kings, Raja Matanda, Raja Sulaiman, and Raja Matanda, Raja Sulaiman, and another Muda. Okay, so there were three kingdoms in Manila. And the defeat of Raja Sulaiman was inevitable because God was on the side of the conquistadores. So the proof of that is basically the Muslim kingdoms lost, even if they had local numerical superiority. So the Muslim ruler Raja Sulaiman's realm was part of a kingdom allied to the Sultan of Brunei, which in turn was connected to the Ottoman Empire via Indonesia, India, and Arabia. Raja Sulaiman was even probably named after Sulaiman the Magnificent, Ottoman ruler from 1520 to 1566. Okay, the Sultanate of Sulu, the Sultanate of Brunei, and its satellites of Maynilad and Tondo, an independent kingdom just to the north of Maynilad, were all part of an Islamic maritime community of nations that knit together with the Muslim traders of India, Arabia, and eventually the Ottomans. So those three encircled communities, those were the original settlements, the kingdoms that were Muslim in Manila. So understand, this is like a mirror image. Manila was Muslim, and then the Christian kingdoms came, they Christianized a Muslim kingdom. And interestingly, at the same time, Moscow during this time was a Christian kingdom that was being attacked by Muslim hordes, the Khanates, basically. And you all know this from your history. I'm just starting to study your history, professor. So, and then I saw this mirror image, right? Russian and Philippine medieval history, therefore, collide, commingle, and are headed in the same eschatological direction. We had a meeting with Metropolitan Anthony recently, my ambassador and I and Catherine there, and we talked about the common faith between Russians and Filipinos. Where are we all headed? I think if you're a Christian, you know that you're headed somewhere, and that somewhere is heaven. Even your president has mentioned it in Davos. Sorry, not Davos, in Valdai Club. So, from a Filipino's perspective, we have the same God, we have the same direction, we have the same end point. We're headed towards heaven. I think there is no disagreement there. Okay. When the Spanish fleet arrived in the Philippines to finally subjugate its people, it was seen in Western Europe as the logical extension of its struggles to free the continent from the occupation and influence of Turks and Muslims. When Miguel Lopez de Legazpi defeated Raja Sulaiman in a naval battle in Manila in the Battle of Bangkusay Channel in June 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, meanwhile, in what is now southern Greece, pitting a victorious Christian fleet against the might of the Ottoman Navy, would begin a few months later. So Moscow was burned in May 1571 by Devlet I Giray. Manila was also burned at the same time. Okay, so that's another mirror event. So, that same year, 1571, Manila became the bastion of Christianity in Asia. And Protestant evangelicals like me and Ambassador Bailen, we know for a fact that American missionaries, Spanish Catholic missionaries, they consider Manila as the fourth Rome. So, Moscow is the third Rome, Manila is the fourth Rome. Do you think it's a coincidence or not? I don't think it's a coincidence. So, if the two Romes, their goal is to build the kingdom of Jesus Christ here on earth, they should be cooperating, right? They should be cooperating. I don't know about your individual faith. Some of us in this generation, you want to keep your faith private. Some of us, we have no problem espousing our faith publicly. It doesn't have to be an argument, but basically, Moscow and Manila are mirror images of each other. One in the east, one in the west. So that's the main thesis. Okay, to continue. Okay, Russia, meanwhile, in 1571 was facing its own Islamic threat. That of an invasion by the Crimean Tatars, who were defeated by the Russians at the Battle of Molody, July-August 1572, between the Crimean Tatars, led, as I said, by Devlet I Giray, and the Russians led by Prince Mikhail Borotinsky of Muscovy. These events, therefore, from my academic, this is not political. I'm just trying to be I'm trying to speak as a part-time historian and academic. These events are flowing in the same great river of competing Christian and Muslim narratives from past to present. If you look at it from this lens, Moscow and Manila are not that far apart at all. That's the main thesis. They are living in the same arc of civilizational struggles, which is ongoing. Okay, it could become interesting, but I would be treading on political matters. I don't want to do that. I'd rather stick to history, because I used to be consul in Turkey as well. And I used to oversee the soft power of Turkey over Muslim Philippines in Mindanao, because they would pass by us, the embassy. They would ask permission, for example, if they wanted to open bank accounts in Mindanao, for example. Similarly, and now I bring up Professor Caldunova of MGIM. She said, okay, Robert, I agree with you that there's something going on there, but maybe what we should focus on is how to diffuse the tension. For example, between Russia and Turkey, and I'm a diplomat, and I have this misfortune or fortune to be assigned in Ankara and Moscow at some point in my career. So I saw the perspective from both The same way I used to cover Azerbaijan as a diplomat, and now I'm covering Armenia. So I think I owe it to my friends and my colleagues, Professor Baklanova, to explain that kind of unique perspective. Okay, so that's why your president's relationship with President Erdogan. I was there at President Erdogan's inauguration as the president of Turkey. I was the charge d'affaires at the time. So I got the chance to greet him personally upon his accession as the president of Turkey, and he's still the president of Turkey now. So there's a very delicate balance of relationship between Russia and Turkey. And those who are following the headlines now, that's the origin of that. So Professor Koldunova of MGIMO was encouraging me basically, as a scholar, maybe we should look at how we should diffuse the tensions. All right, so that's a big job for all the scholars, and I'm the most junior of all of them. All right, so as a diplomat assigned at the Philippine Embassy in Russia for almost 3 years now, I have the privilege of calling both Manila and Moscow my home. These cities are close to my heart because I and my family have been welcomed warmly in this country, and we have lived comfortably in this great city of Moscow. Well lit, very bright at night. My son is 8 years old. He's studying in a Russian school. He's starting to speak Russian. Sometimes he speaks gibberish at home because his mind is, sometimes confused whether he's speaking Filipino, English, or Russian. So, but sometimes if he plays with his Russian playmates, he speaks Russian if he's not too self-conscious. So that's the legacy of my assignment here. So going back to this lecture, records of the travels of Peter Dobell. So from 1571, can we move forward a bit in our time-traveling machine to Peter Dobell, which is going to be the subject of an exhibition of the Philippine Embassy together with MGIMO and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. So, records of the travels of Peter Dobell, an Irish-American who was naturalized as a Russian citizen and was appointed as the first Russian consul, non-resident, in the Philippines in 1817, includes accounts of his visits to the country's capital, Manila. So these are facsimiles of the primary documents. Peter Dobell dreamed of connecting Russia to the Asia-Pacific region, to build trade linkages from St. Petersburg to Kamchatsky and all the way to the city of Manila. Though he was not acknowledged formally by the Spanish colonial government in the Philippines, we can go into another lecture why, but we have no time for that. His persistence and vision led to Russia establishing its very first diplomatic mission in Asia. Okay, 1817, in the city of Manila. By the way, the Russian consulate in Manila got burned. And your embassy got burned also in Manila recently. So these are interesting parallels, Aside from the opening of the consulate in 1817, the year also witnessed the first arrival of a Russian ship in Manila. And I'm quoting from a diplomatic colleague, Mr. Hieronimo Suligin, who wrote this very interesting article and published in Philippine News Agency. So, the year also witnessed the first arrival of a Russian ship in Manila, the Rurik. Do you have a photo of the Rurik? Okay. The Rurik was a Russian brig on a voyage of discovery into the Bering Straits for the purpose of exploring a northeast passage. The voyage was at the expense of the Grand Chancellor of the Russian Empire, Count Romanzov. In command of that expedition was Otto von Kotzebue, a lieutenant in the Russian Imperial Navy, who, as a cadet, made his first travel around the world with Commodore Adam Johann von Krusenstein on board the ship Nadezhda in 1803 to 1806. The second ship of the same expedition, Nieva, passed the Bashi Island on the 27th of November 1805 from the Marianas. Guam is, of course, part of the Marianas, on its way to Macau. It was the Commodore who recommended him to Count Romanzov as eminently qualified for the purpose. Rurik has the distinction of being fitted for repairs in Cavite. So there's a tradition of Russian ships going to Manila ports, to Philippine ports, to get replenished or get repairs. Okay, so that's part of our DNA. So Kotzebue came to the Philippines again during his new voyage around the world under the appointment of Emperor Alexander, Tsar Alexander I in 1823 to 1826. The Russian frigate Pripyati, which I think means enterprise, right? Pripyati. So that ship and her crew of 145 arrived in Manila on 8th November 1825 and had the frigate repaired in Cavite also. She left Manila on the 10th of January 1826. So we were under the Spanish at the time. Okay, that was under Spain. Fast forward again our time machine to 1904, 1905, the Battle of Tsushima. Of course, the Russian Navy was defeated by the Japanese Navy there. So the cruiser Aurora is a very significant piece of Russian history with a slice of Philippine drama. Following the Battle of Tsushima, during the Russo-Japanese War, she was sheltered in Manila following the defeat of the Russian Pacific Squadron in the Tsushima Straits against the Imperial Japanese Navy. We were talking about the Japanese a while ago in your office, Madam Marina. So the ship was repaired in Manila and went on to serve the Russian nation well into the 21st century. So that photo, actually there's a mistake here, which means historians are not perfect. So this is 1905, not 1904. Because the Battle of Tsushima happened in 1905. So that's in Manila Bay. It's a good basis, by the way, for a painting, Catherine. So, although the Philippines was following the Battle of Tsushima Straits, the Russian sailors enjoyed their rest and recreation in Manila following their harrowing experience. And Ambassador Marat Pavlov and his team, your embassy in Manila, have this project to search for the Russian sailors who died following the battle and who are actually buried somewhere in Manila. And we could not locate them, Professor Baclanova. We could not locate them. But we're doing our best. The objective is to have a monument someday in Manila after we have identified where the Russian sailors are buried.
That's such a good humanitarian project.
Yes. So Aurora, of course, is very significant because it fired the warning shot that started the Bolshevik Revolution. You're very familiar with that in St. Petersburg. I visited it a number of times. So, although the Philippines was under U.S. administration at the time, it was Philippine civil servants and port personnel in Cavite, we don't know yet, which served the cruiser and two other ships of the Russian Pacific Squadron, the cruiser Oleg and Zemchu. So I don't have a photo of Zemchu. Actually, these photos are available online, public domain. So there's even a Wikipedia article about this. And the sources are commendable. They are not doubtful. So, but we're trying to perfect the historiography. So now, fast forward again, our time traveling machine to right now, celebrating 50 years of sincere and lasting friendship and 209 years of trade and cultural interaction. In 2026, we will be celebrating 50 years of bilateral relations with Russia, and that started when former First Lady Imelda Marcos, the mother of our current president, came to Moscow as the advance team of her husband, President Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who eventually signed a friendship agreement with Russia, which was then ruled by Leonid Brezhnev, right? So 1976. She came to Moscow for preliminary meetings, and the friendship treaty was signed on the 2nd of June 1976 by President Ferdinand Marcos and his Russian counterpart. So we're all looking forward to that celebration, Professor Frolova, and we want all of you to be part of that. And Ambassador Igor Bailen, okay, now I want to talk about my classmate. We came to the Foreign Service together. He entered the Foreign Service in 1996. I entered the Foreign Service in 1998, but we took the Foreign Service exams together. So we've known each other for 26 years. The only other person that I know longer than him is my own wife. Yeah. So, because we got married in 1998. So, Ambassador Igor Bailen came, this is very interesting. When Russia, now I'm treading a little bit into political, I hope I don't get into trouble by my bosses.
We believe in you.
And by the foreign ministry. So the invasion of Ukraine happened on the 24th of February. We all know that. Ambassador Igor came on the 27th. At that time, many countries were already starting to shun Russia, pulling out their diplomats, not sending any ambassadors, cutting off the ties, destroying bridges of the mind, destroying connections. And here's the Philippines sending an ambassador named Igor on the 27th of February, 3 days after the invasion of Ukraine. What does that mean? It means our friendship is not tied to headlines. Our friendship is not tied to the fashion of the day. Our friendship is not tied to temporary geopolitical movements. I believe, I'm speaking only on behalf of myself, Manila and Moscow's relations are eternal. I think Senator Vyacheslav Fetisov told me after I gave the same lecture in Vladivostok, he told me Moscow and Manila are friends forever. So that's what he said. And I bring that quote with you, and I believe that. So, Ambassador Igor came 3 days after the start of the special military operation in Ukraine. That is a strong message from Manila that we are friends, and that means avenues of cooperation exist and will widen. Of course, we will have differences. Manila and Moscow are not perfect friends. You already know our stand in the United Nations, how we voted against Russia, etc., etc. I will not belabor that point. It's well documented. But the strong message is avenues of cooperation exist and will in fact widen. In fact, on August 3, 2022, and I'm almost finished, sorry for taking too much time, Ambassador Bailen had a first coordination meeting with the Mayor of Manila. Can we move the slides now? Mayor of Manila, Hani Lacuna, with the purpose of preparing for a delegation from Moscow City to visit Manila to establish cooperation not just in trade, but in science, medicine, anti-COVID measures of Moscow and Manila, how we can learn from each other, and how to deal with other emergencies and future pandemics on the horizon. So we are looking forward to January 2023, which is like the tentative date. This is the first time I'm announcing this, actually. So kasi paborito namin kayo, Professor. Hindi lang ito parang dry run, kasi gusto namin kayong unang makarinig before we deliver to MSU.
We really appreciate it.
MGMO and Moscow City Government.
Yeah, and maybe Tatarstan and all that.
Okay.
So,
if you want, we'll cut it out of the video.
So we are looking forward to that visit and the friendship visit to happen. And my ambassador will be sending me, Catherine, and a team to help this delegation from Moscow very gladly. So this date in early 2023 is moving.
And we, with our students, will be there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
So there is
Right here.
Ambassador Marat sent me this photo, and he's very much involved. So was warmly welcomed by Mayor Lacuna in Manila City Hall on September 28, 2022. So last paragraph. We are having a good momentum now because the sisterhood relationship between Vladivostok and Cebu has just been renewed. Catherine, Vida, myself, we were there when the virtual signing ceremony took place between Mayor Rama and the Mayor of Vladivostok. And the Mayor of Vladivostok has been invited by the Mayor of Cebu to attend the Sinulog Festival, which is like the largest party in the Philippines. It's a street party in honor of the child Jesus. All right? So, in closing, ladies and gentlemen, let me present to you this short video. What? No more? Okay. So sorry they didn't bring the video, but you can look at it in YouTube. So that's basically Philippines for you. Once again, let me leave you with that impression that Manila is your sister city in the East. Why? Because of these eternal links. We faced common threats, common quote-unquote enemies who can be friends now. and we faced common Christian civilizational struggles. Sometimes at the same year, sometimes even at the same month, which is May 1571. And then we've had this history of welcoming Russian ships to our ports, replenishing them, fixing them, and we can do it again. Of course, what you see in the headlines are different sometimes in perspective. For example, the whole canceled helicopter deal, etc., etc. But President Bongbong Marcos himself has said, we will always need Russia. We have to deal with Russia because of our own food security issues and energy issues. And this is very official.
Dear Consul General Ferrera, thank you very much for such a friendly, such a warm, such a sincere, I would say, and very much positive and flattering to us, actually, your lecture. And it's a very important message that you just delivered to us, together with Ambassador Bailen, when he kindly invited a delegation of the Institute of Asian and African Studies of the Moscow State University right upon his arrival to Moscow. And it has really been an honor to be among the first scheduled visits of our new ambassador. And it's really important for us, and both for the Institute, for us as Philippine scholars, and for us, I think, as Russian citizens, that we have such sincere and understanding friends. And yes, we have differences, and our countries have differences in some views, especially geopolitical views, but I agree with you that we have to be broad-minded, and we have to see into the future and beyond these frontiers and geopolitical currents, current policies. Thank you very much. And I would also add to your great lecture regarding these mirror events, etc.
Yes.
Let us remind to the audience, who are not all of them Filipinos, that our Independence Days are also on the same date, June 12th, and both the Philippine Independence Day and the Russian, and we actually celebrated together thanks to the Philippine Embassy. Thank you very much for your lecture, and I hope I can say it, I can tell it, that we hope to organize with the invitation and support of the Center of Oriental Literatures of the Russian State Library, a series of cultural events with the Philippine Embassy about the Philippine culture, and so we hope to be also of help with these interesting projects that you've suggested and the Center has just suggested. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening.
Может быть, будет интересно делать общее фото после лекции.
Может быть, еще вопросы какие-то?
И если кто-то захочет задать вопросы, if some people have questions for you.
Sure, yes, of course.
Any questions, guys? Можно на русском, если хотите.
By the way, Russians don't need a visa to go to the Philippines.
And vaccination. And vaccination.
Catherine, can you answer that question?
For November 4th.
She's the vice consul.
For vaccination,
Yeah.
we highly recommend that the Russians who visit Philippines can show their Głososlуги national vaccination certificate in order to avail the visa-free 30-day stay in the Philippines.
Question.
Yes.
If I've been vaccinated by more than a year ago.
It is not a problem.
Oh, good.
You have a proof of your vaccination. It's the Głososlуги,
Yes.
not the private clinic, but the
Yeah,
Głososlуги certificate. It has Russian and English version. You present it. Our Philippine authorities in the airport, they know it. They know it. So thank you for that wonderful question, because we want more Filipinos to come to the Philippines.
Russians.
And Russians as well. Russians to come to the Philippines. Yes.
So, any questions from the audience?
Можно на русском, можно на английском. Как вам это? Да, пожалуйста. Ага. Да.
Какие-то кросс-культурные программы, для, так сказать, общих общего народа, что он для публичной планируется или на
Вы
следующий год?
вы имеете в виду здесь что-то, что проводилось, и там что-то?
Ну, знаете, как Китай, например, очень сильно развивает эту тему.
Да-да, спасибо.
Как-то Филиппины стараются привлекать россиян.
A very good question, actually. Our guest is asking about if you have any project of cross-cultural programs to be organized both in Moscow or Russia and in the Philippines about Russian, the Russian culture, for example. Are there any plans for the next year?
Okay. I was charging the affairs when we had the 45th anniversary celebration. That was in 2021. So we had a series of lectures online because it was the pandemic lockdown, on and off. We plan to, have an exhibit of the Aurora, for example, back then. We are still planning to have that. And there's a statue of Pushkin in Manila, right beside City Hall. So it's like Dr. Jose Rizal having a bronze statue near the office of Mayor Sobian. So you see, so we have Pushkin there in Manila City Hall, in Mehan Garden. So every time there's a Russian delegation, they would be brought there. And in the run-up to the 50th anniversary, we're going to have so many events. I don't know even where to begin. Number one, there was a pianist, Rowena Arrieta. She placed third in the Tchaikovsky. Fifth in the Tchaikovsky piano competition. She was directly sponsored by former First Lady Imelda Marcos, the father of our current president. And she lived in the embassy for that time. She was studying at the Tchaikovsky Institute. And she's coming to the Philippines for a return concert next year? This year?
No, I mean next year here.
Yes, here in Moscow. Yeah, because she's returning to Moscow from that time. So that's one. Another project is another big dream that we have. You mentioned June 12. We would like to celebrate June 12 together. Because what's happening now is the Filipino community would go to the Philippine embassy and we have this big party, right? Philippine Street Fair, June 12, Tinikling and all that. But yes, the Russians are there, of course, but we would like to celebrate it openly with our Russian friends who are celebrating June 12 in the context of Russia Day. So you see, there isn't an event like that yet, where Russia Day and Philippine National Day are celebrated as one. Because I'm starting to present the commonalities, right? So we have more in common than our sense of humor, for example, right? And our love for the sun. Actually, we hate the sun. Because we have too much of it in the Philippines and our skin
you
burns.
love our winter, we know.
Yeah, so we love the winter. So, but anyway, so that's one thing.
We love your sun and sea.
Yes, the sea. So we'd love to do that, a joint June 12 event where we have a street party together. I know that in Red Square, there are concerts that go on every June 12. So I think we were already in talks with my colleague Grace Perpetua, who used to head the Economic and Cultural section, where there's a Nationalities Day hosted by the Moscow City government, the Colombians, the Cubans, the Vietnamese, the Thais. They would contribute to this massive street party hosted by Russia, and then we would hold it maybe in Red Square.
Sounds great.
So that's a dream. And another one, of course, Ambassador Bailen is very much into Russian culture, literature, music, ballet, having served in UNESCO Paris, having served in New York. So one of his dreams is to bring Filipino films that are very iconic and have them subtitled into Russian.
And my dream as well.
Yes, and showed here in Moscow, and vice versa, have great Russian films.
By Tarkovsky, for instance.
Yes, with subtitles in English. We can watch it in English or in Filipino, or we can laugh at the same jokes as that guy, the clown, that famous actor.
You mean
Nicolin.
Nicolin.
So all the Nicolin films, which are very funny, translated into Filipino, because we have a version of him. We call him Dolphy. He's also very funny. So if Mr. Nicolin's films will be translated, they would be much appreciated by a Philippine audience. Okay, what else? My Ambassador Bailen is very much also into chess diplomacy. So under his watch, because his father, who just passed away a few days ago, he was the coach of the of the University of the Philippines chess team. So chess is very much in his DNA. So he said, we haven't had a chess event, you know, between the Philippines and Russia. So the championship match in 1974, 75? In 1978 in Baguio City. So that was hosted by the Philippines between Korchnoi and Karpov. By the way, how is he? Is he okay? Because he was in the hospital, right?
No, walang tagdang balita.
Wala. So they had this championship of FIDE in Baguio City. So Ambassador Bailen wanted to commemorate that by, first of all, what we did was we showed the film that was made about that event. We had a film showing in the Philippine Embassy, and we'd like to bring that Russian film. What's the title again? Game of Champions, right? Champion Mira, Champions of the World, sorry. To bring that film to Manila audiences, so that they would appreciate this great connection between Philippines and Russia through chess. There's a global chess match going on now. We don't know who will be the winner, but Filipinos and Russians love chess. Catherine, would you like to add some more? Did I forget something? Cultural common events?
Martial arts.
Martial arts, yes. You have a...
It's a spectacular project, I think.
Oh yes. Kali, Arnis, Eskrima is very well appreciated by Russian martial arts experts.
We even have several federations of martial arts here.
Yes. For those of you who are not familiar with Filipino martial arts, if you watch the Born Identity films, what others? The films of Liam Neeson, even Star Wars, those were influenced by Filipino martial arts using basically sticks. Sticks. So, yeah, especially the Born films. What else? I'm trying to recall what else we have in mind, planned. Well, we're going to hold a Ambassador's Night in Saritsino. You know, the COVID pandemic is over, so I think we can proceed with that. So Ambassador Bailen plans to have that to showcase Philippine cuisine in Saritsino. I don't know when is the final day, but that's being planned. So, but all of this is just preparation, my friend, towards the 50th anniversary, which is like the big celebration. So books, seminars, symposium. We want to have an Aurora exhibit. We want to have monuments someday in Moscow about Philippine-Russia friendship. Maybe a Rizal statue somewhere here. Yeah, I speak from experience because I tried to put a Rizal statue in New Delhi. So I had a national artist of the Philippines, Abdul Mari Asia Himaw, make a gold bust of Dr. Jose Rizal, and I shipped it to New Delhi as director for India. And then when I became Consul General in India, it was still there, in a box. So it's very challenging to have those kinds of projects. It takes a long, long time before they actually come to fruition. So an ambassador here someday would say, it took me a long time to make this a reality. Right? So, what else? Did I forget something, Vida? Anything else you'd like to add? So they're the right people because they're the cultural and economic section. So thank you so much for that question.
So many interesting projects. Any other questions, dear guests? Russian, English, Filipino?
Oh, of course, our project, Professor Baklanova here, more Filipino books.
Yes.
We'll be bringing them here.
To
and
the
we
center.
can, to the center, and we can have joint exhibits, as you
That
said.
would be really great.
Спасибо большое за нашу столь интересную встречу.
Dear Consul General, thank you very much for such an interesting meeting.
Господин Феррер настолько интересный рассказчик, что хотелось продолжать его слушать и слушать.
And you're such a bright and interesting speaker that we actually wanted the lecture to last more.
Я надеюсь, что это наша не последняя встреча, и что мы еще услышим интересный рассказ об истории Филиппин.
and we really wish that it's just one of a series of our meetings and events together, and we will learn more and more about the Philippine history and Philippine culture.
We would be very happy to do that.
И на самом деле было очень интересно узнать вот все эти параллели, которые вы привели, столько совпадений.
And those historical parallels and mirrors were very insightful and interesting to know, and thanks very much for bringing this into light.
И наш предварительный разговор до лекции, мы уже обсудили немного наши планы. Вот у меня уже как-то и дата даже присовывается, в которой мы бы тоже могли поучаствовать и сделать. Друзья нашего центра знают, что мы проводим здесь много мероприятий. Это может быть и книжная выставка, и выставка фотографий, вы видели, что и какие-то выступления, может быть, национальный танец.
And actually, I'm already thinking about the possible dates for those projects that we've preliminarily discussed, and also the guests and friends of the center know that we have many cultural events here about different countries and regions, and maybe we could also think with you or discuss with you some other forms of the events, such as exhibitions, painting exhibitions, maybe musical concerts, maybe some concerts of artists, of dancers, etc., etc. So everything is discussable.
Okay, yeah, that's very exciting. I look forward to it, man.
Спасибо вам большое, очень рада, что вы нашли время. И очень интересно было послушать.
Thank you very much for your time.
Взаимоотношения России и Филиппин.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a great audience.